Good evening. Welcome to the Hingham Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday evening, January 14th, 2020. We will not have any minutes to approve so that everybody has the benefit of reviewing those. Is there any public comment on any items that are not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none. The first item of business is Plaza Azteca, and that's a request for a change of DBA. Are you representing Plaza Azteca? Could you please come to the table and introduce yourselves? Ms. Bravo, we've seen you here a few times.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, as you said it, yeah, I've been here a couple of times. My name is Maria Bravo. I'm the general manager for Plaza Azteca, now to be named, of course, Vida Mexicana, hopefully.
My name is Ali Hasham, and I work for the corporation.
Okay, welcome. And so this is going to be, what is the name you're going to change it to?
Vida Mexicana.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, the licensing work and everything is in order?
Yep, all the paperwork is in order.
Okay, and Chief, I see you nodding your head. No issues. We appreciate in particular when you've come in for Cinco de Mayo that we've had, I think, a lot of cooperation, and that event's run really smoothly, so we appreciate the partnership with the police. Joe, did you have any questions?
I did want to confirm, the only change here is a change in name. There's no other changes in the operation?
No.
Not that
It's
I'm aware
just
of.
a change of the name.
Okay, great.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Do you want to make a motion?
I will make a motion to approve the request of Plaza Azteca Hingham, Inc. for a change of DBA from Plaza Azteca to Vida Mexicana, subject to the approval of the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
When will the name change take effect?
As soon as possible. I
Okay.
think that was we already had approval from building and zoning to change the signs. The last thing we needed was the approval from the town selectmen to get the name.
So
Great.
once we had everything from you, we're good to go.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Tonight we have six budget hearings, and this should conclude it, right, Michelle?
It should, yep.
Okay. First up is the Building Department. Commissioner Clancy, welcome.
Hi, good evening.
So the building department is requesting $233,938 in payroll, $14,378 in expenses, with an additional town administrator recommended request of $1,582 in expenses, for a total FY21 town administrator recommended amount of $249,898.
And that additional request, is that the uniform allowance?
It is, and we'll cover that.
Okay, great.
Just gonna go through some of the slides here quickly. The Building and Inspectional Services Department falls under the Massachusetts Department of Public Safety. We enforce a series of 14 international codes. Also, we enforce the Zoning Act, Chapter 40A, the zoning bylaw for the town of Hingham, general bylaws for the town of Hingham. Building officials are on call 24/7. As of October 30th, 2019, fees collected for building, sheet metal, certificate of occupancies, final inspections, cost affidavits, and occupancies were $699,497. Electrical, plumbing, and gas fees were $214,753. Total permits issued as of December 30th, 2019 were 4,553. Total inspections for building, sheet metal, electrical, plumbing, gas, zoning complaints, 10,618. Large building projects under construction or nearing completion, 30 Beale Street, 220 units, 210 Shipyard Drive, 77 units. 276 Whiting Street, 90 units. 73 Abington Street, Little Sprouts Daycare. 6 Station Street, Falconary Construction. 31 Otis Street, the Bathing Beach Bathhouse. Derby Street shops continue to renovate along Lincoln Plaza. Michelle went over the salaries. We have 6 full-time personnel in the building department, 1 commissioner, 2 administrative assistants, 3 building officials, 6 part-time building officials. Michelle did go over the expenses. As far as the additional requests for 2021, we have entered private homes, businesses, and construction sites to conduct over 10,000 inspections. In today's world with security concerns, I believe we need to outfit the inspectors with clearly identifiable Town of Hingham apparel to assist the public in identifying the inspectors when we are working on private property. Some of it would be coming out of the general fund, and 1,582 would be coming out of the general fund, and the rest would be out of the revolving accounts. I think that's all I have. Questions?
Well, Mike, I've worked with you for a number of years, and I've always been impressed with your professionalism and the way you've run the department. So thank you for
Thank you.
for how you've really helped the town. I'm looking at numbers, and tell me if this is right. Are we getting fees of about $900,000 coming in? The $699 and the $214?
Correct.
And so, and your total budget is around $250,000?
Correct.
So we are running cash positive, your department?
Yes.
I mean, I'm looking at the changes year over year in the expense items, and everything seems very reasonable. And I agree with your request for a uniform allowance. I think it really helps the public, and it's a safety measure on all sides. So I think that's a great idea. That's all I got.
What was, Mike or Michelle, the determination of the split of the funding request between the revolving and the general? Was that like a 60-40, or was that a,
It was actually.
were there any requirements with the revolving fund?
No. Under the revolving fund, the town meeting votes every year
Yep,
to allow up to $350,000 to be used out of that account.
yep.
The plumbing, electrical, and gas inspectors are paid out of that account. The rest of us are paid out of the
Yep.
general fund.
So the revolving fund uniforms are for those individuals who are paid out of the revolving fund?
That's correct.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And Mike, on the permit fees collected to date, the electric, plumbing, and gas of $214, does that go into that's the money that goes into the revolving fund?
Yes, it does.
Okay, yeah. And that's a perennial warrant article, I think, where we look to get authorization to be able to access that money
Exactly.
during the year. Yeah, it also strikes me, Joe, that if you look at this budget, it's primarily a people-oriented thing, and I think 98% of it are salaries. I would just echo Joe's comments, Mike. You know, you and your department, the demands on the department are significant. They continue to be significant. I would also just point out that you know, you and your team are responsible for enforcing state laws. I mean, that's kind of why you're part of public safety. So, you know, we may say we like the laws, we don't like the laws, but really your job is to enforce the laws. And I know that sometimes that's difficult, and we appreciate that you're putting the town's interests, that you're keeping the town's interests first and foremost, and appreciate the professionalism when sometimes you're in a situation where you have to deliver some bad news.
True, true.
So, and I agree with Joe. I think I think identifiable Town of Hingham clothing is just, it's essential. I'm kind of surprised we don't have it, we haven't had it already.
Don't you have the selectmen's uniform? Mike,
So-
when you do visits, do you have occasion that you need to bring the police with you?
Yes, we do. We work closely with the police or the fire department, absolutely. And again, as far as the department, I couldn't do it without the people that work for me. They do a great job,
Yeah.
along with everybody else that I think works for the town of Hingham.
Yeah, well, and looking at a lot of those projects, I know that, in particular, you've spent quite a bit of time over the last 6 months on the snack shack down at the bathing beach, and just knowing how excited the community is for that to be open, it's gonna be really exciting this spring.
Should be great.
Any questions from the audience on the building department budget? Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Police department.
They already have their uniforms.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
I would note that I think that all departments that are going out into people's houses should have some type of uniform or identification. So I'm glad to see that that's something they asked for. I think that would be really good for people to see that.
Chief, I'll let you introduce your team, but I'll just start with the budget
Okay.
numbers. The police department is requesting $5,758,049 in payroll for FY '21. $3,099,150 for expenses, with an additional town administrator recommended request of $98,209 in payroll, for a total FY '21 town administrator recommendation of $6,255,408. And the police department budget starts on page 115.
So good evening. Tonight we have Deputy Chief Dave Jones and Admin Lieutenant Ryan O'Shea with us. So regarding our budget presentation, I think we talk about the Hingham Police mission. Obviously, we protect and serve and reside to everyone that's in the town. I don't think I want to spend too much time, but, you know, we have our core values that we try to strive for of integrity, service, excellence, and leadership. And I think, you know, a lot of the training and stuff that we do goes towards those in developing the young officers. I think we have a really great training program. We're working on developing our officers into leaders, into future leaders. You know, I'm in my sunset of my career, so eventually we want to have the people there, succession planning, and that's what we've been working on for the past couple of years. Just to benchmark, I think this year, we broke the 26,000 mark, 26,031 calls for service this year. That's up from, the highest we've had before was in 2015 at 24,000, so a significant increase in calls this year. Just some of our core statistics: 244 arrests, 193 complaint applications, 91 new detective investigations, 54 court orders, 15 warrant arrests, and 19 protective custodies. Total citations were 4,940. There were 813 motor vehicle crashes in the town of Hingham, and we issued 283 parking tickets. I think, just as a quick synopsis of some of the things, and I think Mike sort of explained it, because a lot of the stuff that Mike put up on his report of what they've been doing, we're heavily involved in working with all the town boards. We have large-scale events that we work with the town people: the 4th of July parade, the road construction projects, athletic events, school events, voting and elections, Christmas in the Square, Taste of Hingham, Bear Cove Park, the Bear Cove Park remediation projects, and we also are involved in permitting and licensing all the different permits that go through, the alcohol license permits, solicitors permits, we had 565 firearms license issued last year. One of the things that I complain about, but I rather have enjoyed over the years, is doing site plan reviews. Planning and Zoning Board, I think it's really critical that the police department police and fire are represented in those jobs and the projects as they develop, so that we assure that the people of Hingham are protected and are safe, and we take into consideration the road conditions. We've been working a lot with the schools, the interfaith, and the business in safety and security assessments. I think that's a critical portion of what people are expecting from the police department and have come to expect that of us. We have 53 full-time officers, 5 lieutenants, 7 sergeants, 31 patrol officers, 2 police canines, 5 school resource officers, 3 detectives. We have 3 civilian administrative staff, 7 school crossing guards, and 18 special police officers. And we also work with the animal control and the Harbormaster. I think we went over the wage figures. This budget is pretty much held nothing out of just any of the raises would be contractual in nature. As far as our expenses, I think our expenses went up 3%, and they're basically related to inflationary costs. This year we are, as in the past, I think the past 3 years, we've been asking for a new police officer. We have a heavy increase in the calls for service related to the residential and commercial growth within the town. Officers continue to be committed for longer. One of the issues I've been trying to express over the past 4 or 5 years is that police officers are now spending longer and longer at calls. We're being forced into not forced, but we're taking on calls regarding mental health, public safety issues, drug issues, and as a result of that, we're spending more time, and we're working with the criminal justice system. And the goal of the criminal justice system in the modern day policing field is to avoid incarceration and try to intercede prior to jail time or something like that. So that involves whenever there's a drug overdose that occurs, it could occur in any other town, we're notified of it. We send a team of resources out to the families, and we talk to them about getting treatment. We're developing a program with Plymouth County Region, again, what they refer to as a hub. And it's an organization involving all 28 communities in Plymouth where we are providing the same service for any of the mental health issues, public safety issues, children at risk. So it encompasses any time that there's a need of services that people know. I know we've worked closely with, there was just recently with the different boards within town regarding a building that was in the middle of construction, and it was gutted and it was sort of left wide open. We finally got a hold of the owners. We met with them, and in 2 days, the house was boarded up and safe again. So there's a lot of issues that are going on that not only encompass the police and fire, but it's the building inspectors, the planning, the zoning. So it's a group effort. The Board of Health, one of the new programs we're working with is also encompassing a social worker within the town that works 1 day a week for the police department, and that's been a huge success. We share that social worker with Weymouth, and I know one of the discussions that I believe you're trying to find additional budget for the one that's working currently for the town. I think you want to go up to 20 hours because there's not enough time. There's more and more needs for these things, and I think there's a demand that I think in the future that's going to cause that we're going to need someone full time. It just delves into all sorts of, every department needs them for different reasons, and I think also we're just got involved with the triad with the senior center that's developing help for the seniors. So with all these things that we're getting involved in, that's sort of the reason we're looking for an additional officer. Our officers are stretched thin with what they're doing, and the additional funding will allow us to get an extra officer out there. And I know we've been talking about a program what we're referring to as community resource officers, and part of what we're trying to do is better manage the hours that the officers work, and we're trying to connect them with different locations in the town. For instance, an officer may be the point of contact for an interfaith or a religious group or a nursery school, just to give someone that contact and that interaction. You know, we strive to get our officers into all the schools, even though we have the school resource officers out there. And you can see the benefit that it brings. We're looking to, probably over the past 4 or 5 years, we've been exceeding our overtime budget by a little bit over $150,000 annually. Over the past 3 or 4 years, we've been asking to increase the budget on overtime. We originally asked for $40,000. This year, we're asking for the town manager mayor will drop it down to $20,000. So, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Questions?
Yes, well, first, thank you, Chief, and the entire department. It's, your contribution is incredible. I know firsthand from years on the zoning board, you show up at the meetings, and it's the insight that you bring to the decisions that the town boards make is just, it's very important. And people often view the police department as reactionary or reacting to events. But this is all in anticipation to make sure that things are set up the right way. And that's a huge contribution that you make to the town that people, I don't think, typically associate with the police department. So it's great that you're involved there. I had a couple questions. First, with respect to the budget. There is about $7,000 increase in educational expenses. That's in the salary line.
Yes.
What is?
That's a contractual
Okay.
Obligation that we have, the way the officers receive extra pay for associate's degrees, bachelor degrees, and master degrees.
And there's, over the years, significant increases in the defibrillation stipends.
Yes.
Is that the same?
Yeah, what has occurred there as originally it started out with the AEDs, and as the first aid has advanced and the first responder training that we're mandated to, we introduced the use of Narcan, so all officers are trained with Narcan. That was a union negotiation, and at that time we realized that our first responders are being, new technologies are constantly arising in the field. So we tried to address it as, and sort of refer to it as a first responder technology type item, so that next time the new technology comes out, we won't have to be back asking for more money. So it's a stipend for the additional training that the officers receive, so it amounts to $12 a week.
Okay.
For each officer, yeah.
Two areas that often make the news that I don't see talked about in the budget. One is cybercrimes, and I don't know to what extent this department deals with it. And second, the scams that seem to be targeted to the senior community. I know a lot of that's education and that you respond, but how was that addressed in the budget that you presented, those two issues, the cyber issue and the targeting the telephone scams and things like that?
A lot of what we do is, you know, trying to prevent things, and that's an educational and prevention programs where we have officers going out to different things. At Linden Ponds, we attend different events, we work with the seniors, we get speakers in, we talk about the scams. Sergeant Dirth does a wonderful job on the website, constantly posting scams. We have a program where if you go to a Western Union facility, there's a reminder there that, like, whatever you're getting, you know, there's from the Hingham Police right there where they make the phone calls that, like, you know, make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and it's a warning to people. And hopefully they'll see that and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be getting, you know, gift cards and then giving to somebody over the phone. So, and we're going, so we try to educate the public constantly and get out to these different areas, and, you know, that's why I say it's important that we have these community outreach programs, and I think a lot of our time is involved in doing that and trying to educate people constantly regarding scams and whatever else might be out there. And so, like, right now, it just seems like every time there's a scam, another one comes out.
Yep. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Chief, thank you, and, you know, you talked a little bit about the social worker. Do you have a sense in our neighboring communities to what extent, police departments have dedicated social workers? Because I've heard in other parts of the country, you know, kind of anecdotally, that, it's becoming more common.
It definitely is, and I know that the chief in Braintree came up from Connecticut, and they had a dedicated 40-hour-a-week embedded social service worker. And the current program we're working on now is a grant through the federal government, and they're sort of recognizing the whole issue of mental health. And we're teaming up, and I know we share ours with Weymouth. Weymouth has a greater volume of calls and services, so we sort of technically split them 4 days in one day. She's in Weymouth 4 days and in Hingham 1 day, but she's basically on call, so whoever needs her at the time, she responds. She's a really good worker and very experienced. Milton and Braintree have a similar relationship. Quincy has one now, so they're beginning to grow more and more on, you know, in these areas. And their offices just really, they just help the offices so much in dealing with these situations.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, over the years, you've talked about the types of calls, the types of situations that police officers are in, and in many cases, similar to some of our educators.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you're dealing with a host of family issues where the incident that brought the police to the door is the result of some other underlying issues, and it just seems that's going to continue over time, and I think that's something we want to keep looking at, because I think it would definitely be a very helpful resource to the team. Okay. With respect to your additional request, and, you know, I know we've got a couple dynamics in your budget where we've got wages and we've got overtime and we've got shift differential, and they all kind of, you know, one affects the other. With this new police officer, would the responsibilities of this officer, would you see that reducing the overtime or the shift differential in any way? Or do you see this officer doing things, providing services that the department, providing additional services than what the department delivers right now?
Well, I think, first of all, an increase in one officer over 24/7, 365 days is not going to significantly change and see a drastic reduction in overtime. We currently try to staff 5 patrol officers. I think, was it 4 years ago we started that?
Yes, yeah.
We knew that we were originally at 4 officers on the road, but we felt the demands for the town and the public safety issues, we had to increase it to 5. When we increased it to 5, we knew our overtime rate was going to go up. So the only way you can really truly reduce overtime is to take officers off the road and run at lower levels, but then you have to reduce the services. So the general rule of thumb is if you want to put an additional officer on every shift 24/7, is it takes 5 officers to be hired to do that. So this is just sort of a stopgap, but it does allow us, and I think we look at the modern workforce, and I think it's a discussion that we always need to have with the advisory board and the Board of Selectmen here, because I won't say the norms have changed that with the generations, and it's not a bad thing, but we need to accept it. I mean, I can't get people to work 80 hours a week anymore.
Right.
Except for me. No, no. No, but I mean, and it's normal. We've seen it in Europe. We know this has been coming, but we continue to sort of push it down the road. So how do you run a 24/7 organization and continue to have the manning and the needs? And I know we've been doing a lot about, that's why we're talking about trying to move out of civil service. We're talking about, you know, different ways to recruit and retain people, because the needs are there. And in order to have a good police department, we need to recruit top individuals that are willing to devote their time and their energy and do the extra that it takes. And I think, you know, we've been very fortunate in the recruits that we have. We've been really lucky. And I think we have a great police department, but it's the training and everything else that keeps it up. And the technology changes so quickly now. And I think currently right now with the drug issues and the mental health issues, the police department remain in the forefront of who do you call. The federal government and the state government really aren't set up to handle some of these issues yet. I hope in 5 years that they will have enough help, or they will hire or correct their systems so that we don't have to be the ones doing it all the time. But the only alternative right now is we're filling a gap that's not being taken up, and I think that's what we were talking. We just went to a meeting on this with the Hub Initiative, and it's actually a program that came down out of Canada. And, you know, it's linking all the different aspects of what our different, the school departments, the Board of Health, and every single agency within here, that how do we provide services? Because we know that officers or fire departments, when they're responding to calls, they're seeing issues. And we have to direct them to certain people to get those resources. So I think it was put the other day, if you need resources, you shouldn't have to go to 15 different offices to get them. You should be able to go to somewhere and say, what do I have to do? And you know, there's nothing more frustrating when you just have to go from one department to another department. And that's what we're trying to help with, because if we can solve some of those problems, we may get them back on the road to recovery or back in the road to better mental health. And, you know, then we don't have to keep on going back. They're not getting arrested. So it's a long process, and it's taking much more time for officers. And even our reporting stuff, I would laugh, you know, 40 years ago, we used to maybe be able to make 3 drunk driving arrests, do all your reports and be done. Now, if you have a drunk driving arrest, it's basically 4 hours worth of paperwork. So our job is definitely changing, and I think part of the overtime costs are being absorbed by that. Or, you know, a couple of weeks you have a really big weekend, and our detectives really had a couple of weeks of a lot of calls. And, you know, when you're trying to solve crimes and people are injured or property stolen, you've got to be on top of it right away. And that's why I say it's hard to say, because so much of our overtime is generated by what's going on around us and the needs at the time.
Yep. Thank you, that's helpful. I would just, are you going to advisory tonight, or are you going another night?
We're meeting with the advisory tomorrow.
Yeah. You know,
subcommittees.
you know, one, I think sometimes for me, because the dynamics of this budget, it's a little bit unusual,
Yeah.
police and fire. I think the more that people get a sense anecdotally of, you know, how long does it take to write a drunk driving report, or, you know, what's involved in an investigation, I think sometimes it helps, because, you know, as we're looking at this budget and we're looking at the numbers, there's activity behind these numbers. So
Yeah.
I would, you know, I think
I
that-
would gladly go on longer tonight and explain more of those if you'd like, but I know I'm a little bit limited, but
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and, you know, I'm a fan, you know, you've heard me over the years that, you know, and I think in past years, you've shown us the overtime rates in the benchmark communities.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
you know, I think sometimes we gotta make sure we're being realistic with a budget, and I'm all for giving people kind of stretch targets and things like that, but, you know, if an aspect of the budget is chronically underfunded, I think we have to chip away at that, because that gap will only widen.
Yeah.
And you know, so,
I
yeah,
think I think sometimes some people, it would be nice to say, I know what it's gonna be, but it's sort of like predicting the snow. You know, if we have a slow year, and lower crime, then we'd probably have less overtime.
well, I think you also have a case where, again, I mean, I'm just, you know, thinking about, you know, some of the stories you've told over the years, but, you know, if I'm an officer and I make an arrest a half an hour before my shift ends, I've got to process that person, I've got to write the report, and I just kind of can't hand that to somebody else
No.
to pick up and finish. And so, you know, some of it are those dynamics. Okay,
And I think when we do, that's usually what we get much more in depth at the advisory level.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. Thank you, that's helpful. Anybody in the audience, questions? Thank you. How many new, so we've had, is it 4 new officers this year?
Yeah, we have 4 officers in the academy, and they're scheduled to get out.
They'll graduate in April,
Yeah.
so then they'll have 3 months of field training after that, and then, pending their completion of that, they'll be on the road.
Yeah, well, and it seems to me that Hingham is an attractive place for an officer candidate to come and have a career. So I think a lot of what we're talking about tonight is making sure that our officers have the tools and the resources they need.
Yes.
Because I think retention of our public safety team is really important. So, again, thank you for everything that you
Thank you.
do. And Lieutenant, nice to see you at the budget table.
Less stressful than the last time I was up here.
Yeah. We won't ask you any questions about the numbers. Okay, so next is the Harbor.
Thank you
Michelle,
very much.
I just noticed that in our budget books, I think maybe we had an old version of a couple of the slides.
I think those were updated, yeah.
I think, please be
Oh,
sure the
okay.
advisory committee gets that with the number of calls in particular.
Yes, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you might have filled this out before you had the full year's worth of data.
Yeah, but they were filled out with November's data.
Yeah,
we
so,
didn't have a chance to add December. And
I would make sure the advisory committee had it, because my guess is that their books were printed the same time ours were.
I saw you looking confused at times. That must have been what it was, okay.
I look
Sorry
like that a
about
lot.
that, yeah.
Hello, Ken.
Good evening.
Welcome.
The next budget is on page 168, the Harbormaster. We have Ken Corson and Joe Driscoll with us. And the Harbormaster FY21 request is $198,204 in payroll, $75,921 in expenses, with an additional town administrator recommended request of $4,000 for payroll, for a total FY21 town administrator recommended request of $278,125. I'll click for you.
Well, thank you for having us here this evening. I'll start off with like a brief mission and services kind of overview for yourself and for the public. The Harbormaster's office is part of the police department. We are public safety. We provide protection of the harbor, protection of life and property. We also do a lot of education. We enforce laws and regulations governing navigable waters, the islands, and the shorefronts. The Harbormaster's office isn't just the waterways. We have 5 islands, and then we have roughly 26 miles of coastline. We also have a harbor management aspect, and these involve various things from mooring management. We just completed the 10th, every 10 years we do a dredging project, so we just completed that. We're working towards replacement of the boat ramp, hopefully in the next year. As I mentioned, we have 5 islands. We also manage the boat ramp. It's a pretty busy place. We'll see some pictures of things that take place there. We also have a large beach, and then throughout the year there's different types of events that take place. One of the larger ones is the red carpet event that takes place every spring, where every graduating senior comes down and takes a picture, and all their family come, and it's all in about an hour, so it's a pretty busy period of time. As the harbor master, I'm also the shellfish constable. Shellfishing right now is not really taking place because there's not a large population, but when it is in place, we have diggers here routinely. We're inspecting the catch. Right now, we're kind of just monitoring the shellfish, working with the state, and when it's appropriate, we'll reopen. This is a chart of the waterways for the town of Hingham. I like to put it up just so people can see the entirety of what the Hingham waterways is. We tend to drive by the Rotary and the harbor, and we look out and we go, well, that's Hingham Harbor, and that is just a small portion of it. If you look on the chart, you'll see there's an A kind of in the middle and the bottom. That's the Rotary, where we look out and we see the 4 islands. The waterway extend all the way out to area where that D is. That's out by Bumpkin Island. And then it extends to the right. There's a letter C, that's World's End. And then over to the left, it goes all the way down to I believe it's E&F, that's going down the back river over by the Hingham Shipyard Marinas. So the waterways are much larger than just what we look out and see from the inner harbor. Here's some benchmarks of the calls that we take in a year. So this past year, we logged 193 calls for service, roughly. And that's the overall number, so there's things in there ranging from, you know, a boat broken down, or a boat in the mud flats, or maybe a no-wake violation. So it's encompassing many different things. Specifically, there were 66 incidents that I listed that I think are important to kind of see the types of things that we are dealing with and addressing out there. I put in 27 violations, for example, to try to demonstrate that we do write violations, but we don't write a lot. We really do try to work to educate the boating public. People are out there, it's recreational, so we don't want to ruin their day, so we do definitely try to educate, but at times there are violations that need to be issued. We do have boating accidents. We did have several medicals, and we do some investigations. So that's just a little synopsis. And there's some images on the right so you can see the different types. Here's a boat coming in, and clearly the weather's turning for the worst, and we're actually going out. So it's important for people to recognize that we're not always just coming in when the weather gets bad. I'm going to turn over to Joe Driscoll, the head assistant harbor, who's going to talk a little bit about the pump out services that we offer, our department offers. And he specifically kind of managed this every year, so I think he's the best person to speak to that.
So the pump out program, it's a big part of our operations. Last year we had 400 hours of pump out service from our assistants. It's really vital to keeping the harbor clean. We pumped out 6,000 gallons of waste from boats within Hingham last year, and that number continues to go up, and we continue to be very busy with that program.
So just in case you're not familiar exactly with what the pump out services are, our boat goes out and it removes waste from the boater's holding tank, and we bring it in and offload it on shore. It's a way to ensure that the material doesn't get dumped into the harbor. We also have a self-service pump out station at the town pier that the public can come in and use during daylight hours. So it's a great aspect of our operations. I'm gonna talk a little bit about, we talked about the public safety aspect, we've talked about the pump out boat, I'm gonna talk a little bit about mooring management. That's something that I really became pretty passionate about 10 years ago. We had a big dredging project, and it was time to put moorings back in, and we really didn't know where the moorings were gonna go, who was where, so that was my first year as Harbormaster, so we devised a mooring plan. And there's an image of it to the right. We talk about a mooring plan, but I believe it's important for people to see the level of detail that these mooring plans are. Each color of, you see like the shape of a boat and a line in front of it. You obviously have the boat, and then you have the chain in front of it. So each color represents a different size boat. They all have very specific GPS positions and specific gear that's required for that mooring, the certain chain lengths and weights. And this is how we're able to accurately manage our field, know when we have vacancies, where they are, who's supposed to be where. It helps us out in an emergency to know where the person is. They call up and they say, I'm on this boat. We're able to quickly locate where that boat is and respond there. So they're very detailed plans. We have about 1,582 mooring locations throughout the town. That does include slips, not just moorings, but slips and moorings. I think there's, not exactly sure, but it slips and moorings. In the shipyard alone, there's about 500 slips, to help put it in perspective. Last year, we logged roughly 3,300 vessels, and how we logged that, that's the number of permits we issued, and then the number of recreational vessels that did a transient mooring reservation, came into town. So you could have one boat that did a couple reservations over the year, and that would get logged, so that's how we reached the 3,000. So it's not necessarily novel boats, but it's the boats we have plus transients that come in and the number of trips. Most of our transient stuff takes place in World's End. It's not uncommon to go through World's End and see 3, 400 boats on a Saturday or Sunday. If you're familiar with World's End, I'm sure you can see the number of boats that come in there. So regarding the mooring plans, we have 5 mooring areas. We have the inner harbor, which you see from the Rotary, the outer harbor, which you would view from the yacht club, World's End, the back river, which is kind of goes from Turn Harbor Marina, or the end of the Hewitt's Cove Marina, to the back river bridge. It doesn't extend under the bridge. And then we have the Hewitt's Cove mooring area. Some key initiatives. We just completed the dredging, which went really well. It was completed in about a month versus the 3 or 4 months that it could have taken. We're working to replace the boat ramp with the state. We are hiring several new assistants. The police department hired a couple of my assistants, so now we're looking to replace them. It's great that they hired them. It's great to see them promoted and staying with the town. We're also looking to do continued grant writing. We're looking to replace one of our boats that was new back in 1997, so we're going to be doing some grant writing. And I'd like to continue initiatives to promote camera use in the town. It's been really successful for us, and we haven't had any issues with that. I do have a brief, if it's all right, a brief kind of overview of the dredging project. The successful bidder was Cashman, almost $3 million. Dredging was a success. 50% of our costs will be reimbursed through the state. It was a slow process initially. As of July 1st, 2019, we had no permits, and we were awarded funding from the state, and we were able to secure all our permits and have the contractor in town on or about October 1st, which is the earliest they can start. They dredged round the clock. They removed about 64,000 cubic yards and took it all offshore, and it was completed in about a month, so it was really a great job. We'll see them again roughly 10 years maybe. Going forward, I am looking to, and I'll talk about it briefly after, but looking to do what we did 10 years ago, and that's look at our mooring field and consider what the layout of the boats should be for the next decade. So we'll talk about that. So we have salaries and expenses, which we kind of reviewed earlier. When it comes to expenses, we see 75,000, and that's a large number. So I have taken some of the larger numbers, what our expenses are, and kind of broken them out. So if you see 75,000, you go, wow, that's a lot of money. There's a lot to do with that. But I think it's important when you start breaking it down and see what it's being used for. I think it's an appropriate number. So we have fuel, R&M and grounds. That's just managing the grounds around the waterfront, the town pier, sometimes stuff on and around the islands. R&M vehicles, that's not just cars, but it's 3 boats, 2 vehicles on land. And boats are expensive. That's bottom painting, compound waxing, winterization. So I think that's a pretty good number. Mooring info, that's our online service that we use to manage the moorings. When I say manage moorings, it's not just the renewal phase and permitting, but it involves tracking the vessels and expenses and so forth. And then use and occupancy, that's at the shipyard. That's like our rent. And then we do have utilities that we pay. I do have one request for $4,000. That's for additional assistant harbor masters. Right now our assistant harbor masters kind of do 2 roles. They do pump out operator and they do the assistant harbor master position. I'm getting to the point where I want to start separating those duties a little bit. The dynamics of the calls that we respond to on the water require there to be a little bit of a separation there. That way we can also provide the services simultaneously. There's going to be a lot of training over the next year. We're going to have to hire a bunch of new assistants. And there's continued increased use at the harbor, especially in World's End. There was a lot of work that we had to put in at World's End, numerous complaints at night for noise and various disturbances. So we're required to do a little bit more. So I think that's an appropriate number to meet not meet, but kind of bring us up to where we are with the requirements on the waterfront.
Joe?
Well, your jurisdiction goes way out there, into the, out to World's End. You cover a lot of territory and you do it well. I've seen firsthand, and it's very impressive. So thank you. I did not see in here the the revenue side. Maybe it's here and I didn't, so the permit fees, mooring fees, how much money comes in?
So that's a great question. I think it might have been in an earlier slide. I'm not exactly sure. But revenues roughly are about $320,000, roughly.
Okay.
So revenues do exceed our expenses.
And in addition to the typical revenues, I know you were involved extensively in getting the grant money that I think Lieutenant Governor Polito came and, you know, made a presentation, and from what I understand, that was largely, vastly, because of the effort that you put in. So thank you for providing those, making sure that the funds came to the town. It was just a great boost, and we appreciate it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
On the expense side, I noticed a shift in the way you've accounting for fuel expenses. It looked like it had been divided in fuel marine 1, 2, and 3, and now it's all lumped in to marine 1, so that there's a $10,000 jump in that category, but then there's a zeroed out in the other categories.
Correct.
What
We
was
used to
the-
break the fuel, it's kind of fluctuated around over the last 10 years. It was decided at one point to try to break the fuel out for each vessel, and it's more work than it's really worth. If we need to know
Right.
what each vessel is consuming fuel-wise, we can determine that, but for budgeting purposes, it's really, this is what we spend fuel-wise, and I believe that's what the police, what the chief does with his unit. So it just makes it a little bit easier when it comes to this budgeting here. So it's not really an increase.
Right, great, thank you, that's it.
So just to follow up on that though, Ken, if I look at those three amounts, they total about $9,000 in total, and then it's going up to 13,400. Is that rate driven?
So, yeah, so it's rate driven, and so the way the fuel usage works is we put in the number of gallons that we used this year or whatever, with an estimate of what it looks like we're gonna use for the full year, and it's calculated by what the report is of the number of gallons we used and then the rate, so that's how it's calculated. So sometimes it goes up, some doesn't
Yep.
rarely go down, but it usually
Okay,
goes
so
up.
so the increase is rate driven.
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to remember when we did the dredging contracts, and we were looking at dredging, we talked about the possibility of the amount of material that we removed, and we said, you know, you never sort of know until you get in there. How did the 64,000 cubic yards compare to our estimates?
So I believe I have the exact number for you. Let me just double check. So I don't have the exact number, but I believe what we took out maybe another 1,000 or 1,500 cubic yards in additional. So there was additional material, but it wasn't hugely significant.
And when we were doing it, I remember we talked about the fact that we didn't want to necessarily wait another season, because if the material accumulated over a certain amount, then the dredging could extend into two seasons. So, do you remember what we were, you know, I guess what I'm wondering is, did the amount of material we removed, was that less than, greater than, or about what we estimated?
It was less than what we estimated, but there was also one small section that hasn't been dredged, so we don't know what that actually would have turned out to be had we dredged the entirety of the. We dredged what we intended to dredge, but there was a small section that wasn't, so had that been dredged, we don't know exactly what the.
Yeah, okay.
But it was definitely less, there was less material than we anticipated there might have been with buildup over that
Sure.
the year and a half from our initial
Sure.
survey.
And I would just echo my colleagues' comments. You were instrumental in getting this grant. I don't think it would have happened without your effort and without your work and the presentation you put forward for the town. You know, $2 million, it's wonderful. And I know we were sitting here last year with warrant articles on dredging, thinking about the different possibilities, hoping we might get a grant. And I think this exceeded our expectations, and I don't think that happened by accident. So, can't say enough how much we appreciate your effort on that. I believe, Michelle, we don't have this posted, so I don't want to go off kilter, but I believe that there's some kind of a warrant article relative to dredging. I think, for me, 2029 is going to be here before we know it, so thinking about how we as a town, do we want to be proactive, and do we want to potentially start to save some of the money that we collect so that 10 years from now, when we're looking at dredging,
We have a reserve.
we've got
Yeah.
some money. I would add, Joe, just on the revenue piece, and that does come in through local receipts. You know, some of that is dedicated for waterways funding, some of it is for harbor. And also, when it comes to capital outlay, there have been times when some capital outlay has been partially or completely funded through that budget, you know, through the revenue that comes in. Any questions from the public on the Harbormaster budget? Okay. I think, Ken, while you and Joe are here, and actually, before we do that, I would just add one thing, and, you know, Joe, thank you for your efforts on the pump-out boats. As a boater, I've noticed the availability of the pump-out boat is much greater than it used to be. And I think also there have been some years when the equipment has broken down, and so, you know, it's been difficult. It's a wonderful service. It's helping keep our harbor clean. And what you're doing to have your assistants and have people on the water and have that boat be available, I think is really important. I mean, just, you know, sitting in the harbor, you hear all the calls coming in. And I think what you're also doing is you're having that boat available on weekends, particularly in World's End, when you know there's a lot of traffic. And I think that's a very helpful service, and again, it helps keep the harbor clean. There is a vote that is on our agenda for tonight that maybe while Ken is here, Michelle, just take up. And Michelle, maybe you could just please explain the purpose of this vote and what we're actually voting tonight.
Sure. So the request before the board tonight is for a fourth amendment to the town's contract with Foth Engineering, the folks who have helped us with the dredging project and the engineering work for that, to be able to provide some engineering assistance to the Harbormaster to look at some possible options for the future of the mooring field. So as Ken's mentioned before, since we've taken all the moorings out right now, it makes sense to reevaluate, like we did 10 years ago with the last dredging project, what's the best way to put them back in so we can optimize use of the harbor.
Okay, and Ken, you mentioned that the boat ramp is being replaced, and I also know, we know, because we had the Hingham Maritime Center in a few weeks ago, that there's some activity going on in sort of that inner harbor area that could impact moorings.
Correct, so there's mainly three things that I'd like to look at with this plan right now. We have roughly 30 boats on the waiting list, so if we could put a few more boats in to try to decrease that number, that would be great. Potentially, maybe within the next year, the state will be replacing the boat ramp, and I don't want to lose those moorings. And at Barnes Wharf, with the potential new docking system, I don't want to lose any moorings there, so I think that there's some work we can do to relay out these moorings and not lose any moorings, and maybe add a few that would help decrease the waiting list.
Could you just describe the approach that'll take place? Because, how will you go about doing this?
Sure. So this was done 10 years ago, and I plan to use the same system that we did then. It worked out very well, with maybe a slight modification. The socialization process will begin once we have a plan that we can actually start showing people, which I anticipate will be in the next couple of weeks. If this gets approved, we'll start work on that right away. Actually, at Harbor Development Committee meeting next week, I'm going to be talking about some of the potential regulation changes that might take place for next year, so we're getting those out. So that'll be the first phase, just socialization. I think I'll do an initial presentation to the Board of Selectmen on what some of the challenges are and how I'd like to resolve them, so you'll be aware of it. And at some point, there'll be a public hearing. We did this 10 years ago. We will reach out to all the any abutter of where we might do something. We'll let all the permanent boat holders know. We'll publish this in the paper. We will make it very known that there will be a public hearing on this. I think when I held that public hearing 10 years ago, it was probably the largest attended event in Town Hall. It was basically the entire second floor through the hallway. So there'll be a public hearing, and then at the end of the process, whatever is determined to go forward with, will ultimately be brought to the Board of Selectmen for approval. It'll get my approval, you'll be able to provide your approval, and then it even will go to the environmental police for their limited review of the things that they need to do.
Yeah, and the board was forwarded, I know we got some correspondence from a private owner of a marina with some moorings in the harbor, and my understanding would be that in this process, that as part of your outreach activity, you would be reaching out to all the various constituencies who have moorings in the harbor, whether they are part of a town organization or a private organization?
Yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
okay. And I like the idea of all the outreach. I had not realized how widely attended your last meeting was, but I think that means there's an interest, and I think that'll be very helpful to do. Joe, did you have any questions about this?
Yeah, specifically
Request?
about the addendum number 4, the amounts, $41,285. Ken, do you know, so this is the Fourth Amendment, how much we've spent?
Yeah, so I do have some numbers for you on that. So with engineering, we've basically been right on budget with everything. So for phase 1, which was the permitting of the project up into construction, which we call it construction, but the actual dredging, was estimated to be about 169. We did have a change order that came through for some additional testing in and around the marinas. So we were just over $200,000 for that, which is a large number. In 10 years ago when we did this, we had the same budget. So we were able to maintain the budget 10 years ago, basically the same budget this time. Phase 2 is construction, where the contractor has to go out and do water quality tests. There's a bunch of things that have to be done in conjunction with dredging. It's not just the dredger comes in and does the work, and that was estimated to be about 89,000. And we came in at about 81, so that was a little bit under budget. So there have been some significant expenses that go with dredging. It's an expensive project, and try to do everything I can to keep them down. So that's where we are budget-wise with the dredging. In engineering, in regards to dredging, we the quote was about $2,800,000. We ended up having some change orders that are going through. We had to change a bucket to dredge around the boat ramp. That was about $58,000, and the additional sediment was in another $48,000. That's what the cost was to take it offshore. So there were some additional changes there that are getting processed now. So overall, I think we're doing well. We anticipated the engineer anticipated the entire dredging project could cost about $3.5 million. We knew it could cost as much as $5 million. Obviously, we hoped we weren't at $5 million, but we came in again under the engineer's estimate of $3.5 million. So I think we did a excellent job. It is expensive, and I do understand that. I know that this is not a small request to come asking for $41,000 for engineering. Not everything that we do on the harbor we associate with just creating more revenue. That's obviously something we strive to do, but there's a lot of other things that I take into consideration, such as safety, harbor management. At the end of the day, all said and done, this addendum also talks about World's End, doing a new mooring plant out there. Just with my own experience, I feel as though we're probably able to safely add in an additional 8 moorings. Each mooring goes for about $650 a year, so over the next 10 years, that's about $52,000. So any changes we make, I do think will result in additional revenues. So if we can get more than 8 moorings anywhere, we're in the positive overall, but this really isn't just about creating more revenues. It's really about managing a harbor and keeping up with the times, so that I'm always trying to think forward now. A lot of time has been retroactive, but I'm thinking forward, when we come up, if there's a dredging grant in 10 years, I want to try to position the town in the best position, and that's included in this, to look at new technologies for moorings and how to decrease our waiting list, so that when we make those applications, the state has seen that we continue to try to positively manage our mooring fields.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the contractor, with Foth? I mean, you're satisfied with their operations, how they've been responsive?
Yeah, they've been excellent, very responsive. The team that we're working with, we worked with 10 years ago. They did the mooring plans for us then. They're very experienced, knowledgeable in this area. I don't know exactly, but I would guess to say somewhere between 70 and 85% of their work is from municipalities. So they understand the goals of a harbormaster, and they understand mooring fields and management of the harbor, and they also understand the state and what the state's looking for when it comes to different grants. So they're in an excellent position to help us achieve our goals.
And you mentioned the work in World's End, and the contract talks about a bathymetric survey. What is that?
So that will be, basically it's depth soundings. So they'll send out a survey boat that will do transects throughout the area and get the water depth. So that when we look at placing boats, we'll be able to see in the last 10 years what has changed with the geography under the water. Have certain places got deeper? Have they gotten shallower? So that we can make sure that we put boats in appropriate positions. In 10 years, if we had to do this again, we might not have to do the bathymetric survey, but there's only one survey that's been done that's any useful, and that was 10 years ago, so we'll be able to see what the change is.
Yep.
And that is a substantial cost. It's quite a bit of time for them to go out there and do that survey.
You really are forward-looking in making sure that we're addressing this properly, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate Ken reached out and called me earlier today to kind of walk through a lot of this and talk about it, so that was actually very helpful, and I appreciate it. I remember when the harbor was done 10 years ago, when you looked at the moorings and placed things, and I think it resulted in a more efficient harbor, and I think that it made your job easier because you knew where things were. It only makes sense to me that we've just cleared out the whole harbor, and so before we put everything back, let's check to make sure that these are the right places, especially knowing that we have a boat ramp and some activity down at the Maritime Center that could affect things. Let's take that into account before we put everything back in.
Yep.
Anybody in the audience questions on this vote? Okay, Joe, do you want to make a motion?
So I will move to authorize the town administrator to sign contract amendment number 4 with Foth Infrastructure and Environment to perform additional services as they relate to the Hingham Harbor Maintenance Dredging Project. The sum amount due for that fourth amendment is $41,285.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe,
Before I
thank
leave the table, I would just like to point out that I have an excellent staff, and the ability of our department to achieve these goals is not just due to my work alone. Joe's an excellent head assistant harbormaster. He does much more than just the pump out operations. He manages the day-to-day schedule, makes sure that the staff gets out in the water and that the things that need to be taken care of are addressed. And the work of every assistant, all the way down to the assistant that does the pump outs, is very important for the operations of our department. So I just want to point that out. It's not just me, it's the hard work of everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, good night.
Thank you.
Animal control. Welcome, Leslie.
So the animal control budget is on page 158. Leslie Badger is here with us. Animal control is requesting $67,986 in payroll, $6,200 in expenses, for a total town administrator recommended budget of $74,186. This may be another budget where there's a few slightly updated slides in the presentation, and we'll make sure to.
So I'll look at the slides.
Great,
and I-
okay.
So thank you for having me tonight. To go over my mission and services of what I do. I am in charge of enforcing the town's bylaws and the Chapter 40 for the state's laws, along with finding missing and loose pets and reuniting them with their owners. And that can be anything from dogs, cats, livestock, birds, and any pets that person has. I've even had to find a couple lizards that have gotten loose, or snakes, so. Hingham is very unique with its pets. I also respond to sick or injured wildlife. As we know, this year we've had a lot of talk about coyotes. I'm also in charge of handling any large deceased animals in the roadways. And back to the coyote program, I oversee that and make sure if we get any emails or calls to address them through our coyote program, which is either going out to that neighborhood or individual person and having a presentation, it's more of a condensed version of the one that I put on with all the officials last year at the library, discussing education, keeping themselves safe, and being able to coexist with coyotes. I'm also the animal inspector for the town of Hingham, and actually, along with the animal control, I'm also in charge of Bear Cove Park and making sure the leash law and dog licenses are followed. But with animal inspector, I'm in charge of quarantines and bites, also barn inspections and kennel inspections. As the animal control officer and animal inspector, I work a lot with the town clerk department, the Board of Health, DPW building, and the social workers. I work with both the social workers on the town hall side and the police department side. As the chief stated earlier, a lot of my calls now are becoming involving mental health. A lot of people that I deal with also have now either service dogs or comfort dogs. So I get called into a lot of those situations as well now to help with that. And obviously I work with the PD and the fire department. Another two groups that I work with quite a bit is the Veterans and Elder Services. We still have with the Veterans Department, we still have the Vets and Pets Fund. This year, we've helped three different cases with veterans. We also had a few veterans that we've continued to help since we started the fund. Sadly, one of the veterans I've been helping the last year and having regular visits passed away this past weekend. That was the Deacon McHughes. So that was a tough one, but we were able to help him and his dog through this last year and a half with the funding. So that is the overview of what I do as the animal control officer. To go into my numbers for calls, I have 701, citations 8, quarantines 23, loose dogs 21, roadkill pickups 56, barn inspections 15, and kennel inspections 6. For citations for animal control, being the size of the town that we are, as Harbormaster also stated, I try to educate as best I can. I try to work with a lot of people first time warning, unless it's a situation that really warrants getting the citation. So that is why my numbers are the way that they are. And I think that's important because you go a lot further, I find, educating and a warning system. A lot of people realize right away and change that behavior and work and do what they need to do to correct the situation, and then we're able to move on. And I'm lucky to have very few repeat offenders. Continuing on into my key initiatives, as I said, I'm working on the Coyote, that is an ongoing program that I'm working on, is the Coyote program. I'm hoping to do even more education as the year goes on. This year, I did 6 different neighborhoods. These last probably 6 months, I've been out to 6 different neighborhoods having, so what happens is, a representative from that neighborhood will get together with all of their neighbors and say, let's plan on this day, we'll have the ACO come out. And I go meet up with all of them. I have a conversation with all the adults. Then we bring in the kids and talk about safety, answer any of their questions. So the kids aren't overwhelmed with hearing more of the adult topics of coyotes. And then it's more in their level. So we make sure that not only are the adults being addressed on the coyote issues, I make sure that the kids are getting also educated as well. Again, as I said, working with the Veterans Department and Elder Services, helping both our seniors and veterans. I continue to work with community outreach for both the Boys and Girl Scouts and in our schools. And also promoting, as I said, the off-leash programs for Bear Cove Park. And I plan on working, I've already reached out to the Beale Street community that's being built once they're finished. We're gonna work on getting whether it's gonna be posters or signs, or with each person that moves in, or a flyer, depending on what works the best for that community, about the policy if they're gonna walk their dogs, because they have an entrance that goes right into Bear Cove Park. So hopefully get ahead of before it turns into an overwhelming situation in the park. I'm also working a lot with the trustees, the state parks, and most recently I've been starting with Black Rock, because they've been having some issues with leash laws and loose dogs. So they asked me to come in there and do some patrols, and the same with Linden Ponds. And boarding?
Yes.
Yes, I also, with the Board of Health, that is another thing that I work with, is actually hoarding. We've had quite a few cases still that have involved hoarding. The biggest one thus far was the 79 cats that I had to take out of a house, along with 30 snakes, 1 rabbit, 4 birds, lizards, so quite a few. So I know it's surprising to some people, but these are all issues that we do have in Hingham. And you wouldn't even know, looking at some of the houses from right out front, that these issues could be going on. And it's not necessary situations where the owners don't love their animals. They just get into a situation where either the finances get tough, or they think that they can handle having a few extra animals. Then it turns into more and more, because again, the finances get tough, and the spaying and the neutering. So I try and also help with helping them find low-cost spay and neuter, and getting that information out as well too. And then I think finally is the expenses. Some of the pictures are up there of the different things that I've done in the community with veterans, going to classrooms, the spelling bee last year as one of the moderators, the dog that's in the crate down in the corner, that was Clover, that belonged to Deacon McHugh. That was his dog. So the little, she passed away as well. So they're now both back together. So that's about a little bit about what I do. And finally, the expenses at the end. I have that written down here. Yes. So as we said, do you need me to go over those again to where you talked to? Okay. So, yes, any questions that you have for me?
Joe, questions?
I got one for the chief. How many animal control officers do we have? Because we just heard a presentation, it sounded like there were at least 2 or 3 active all the time. So that was just amazing.
We've actually, well, we have Leslie, who does 120% of everything. I actually tell her to stop doing it all the time, but we've also have some people that have worked part-time to help us out. And once again, we a lot of time we've used some of the Harbormaster officers as part of that role as well, because they're special police officers, and that seems to work out good, so. this provides us with a good training base. But I think one of the things we've been working with Leslie is more training. We're trying to get her up. I think one of the things I'm trying to promote her to do is to finally get certified. We're talking about getting certified in
Chemical capture.
chemical captures, and which is, I think everyone expects in town that we have the capability of tranquilizing, you know, a wild animal, and we don't have that. I think that's something that we've talked about getting, and she's going to be taking the training for that.
I mean, that was just the list of things you've got, your goals. It's amazing. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
And I remember before you were here when we had members of the public who were concerned about coyotes, and I know
Yes.
you've done extensive education. Are there a number of incidents that are continuing, or is it basically under control, or?
With our program, our email program, I should say, we get a lot of emails from, the incidences are from seeing them, whether it was either that day or a few days in the past. That seems to be the majority of what the emails that we get. We have had a couple of dog versus coyotes, and that usually goes hand in hand with making sure they're being supervised. But luckily, thank goodness, so far, we have not had any other incidents that were severe enough involving humans.
And to what extent are you involved with the state on the coyote issue? Because I know that they have their own.
I just would mention too, Leslie and I have been working with Selectman Johnson, and we're actually sort of preparing probably a presentation. I know she wanted to follow a presentation on that, so we have been working with the state and putting together some numbers, but Leslie's been in constant contact with.
Anytime we have anything that I deem that is of concern or severe in nature, I will immediately reach out to environmental police, Mass State Fish and Wildlife, to make sure that they're aware if they have any other thoughts or if they want to come down and investigate and do anything further on their end. So anything that would be severe, even when we had the incident, a past incident a couple months back involving a dog, I notified them. And they will check over the situation and deem if it's something they need to come out with or not. So I do make sure to keep an open communication with them as well.
Thank you.
One of the things we've had some discussions with, also, we realize that people that have, compost piles and stuff like that,
Yes.
in their yards, we're trying to encourage that they don't do that, or they don't use food out there. But one of the things that we've been consulting and looking at is that often our own trash receptacles at various public facilities are food sources for the coyotes. So we're starting to look in a way that if we can get some grants and we could use those trash facilities that they use they use, you see them throughout the cities in certain areas where they're actually self-contained compactors.
Right.
And they're closed off, so that way the animals can't get in them. It's not just the coyotes, but it's also the seagulls and everything else. And I know the highway department's constantly faced with going down there and picking up trash that's been pulled out over the course of the night. So, but I think some of the things like that, if we set the example and start putting those out in our areas that the town owns, it's an example to other people to help out with the cause. And that should check, it's a possibility of cutting down on some of that stuff.
And the chief does make a good point about it showing other towns. I was at training today with 35 other ACOs, and I brought up what we were doing in Hingham, and they were all very shocked. And they're like, "You're doing way more than you should be doing." But I'm like, "But this is what we're faced with. So this is what, we have to try and do something within, our legal rights of the rules and laws and bylaws." But so we are definitely the only one right now that is actually taking such an active approach.
Well, thank you. It's really very much appreciated.
I would echo Joe's thanks for the proactive approach to this. And also I appreciate that you are keeping the state in the loop, because understanding that the state really regulates a lot of this.
Right.
If the way to affect change is to keep the state informed and educated on the issues facing the municipalities, I also appreciate the way that, you know, we've collected the data, and I know at the beginning, you know, there were a lot of 911 calls about, and I think we figured out the right way to get that data and to use that data, and that will be helpful. Leslie, I would just echo Joe's other comments. You know, in this community, you are such an important resource. If you think of the number of households that have pets and animals, and you just think of, you know, Bear Cove Park and places where people enjoy the outdoors, you touch so many Hingham citizens. I want to thank you for helping get the dead raccoon out of my garage. Leslie, what do I do? We don't know if it's alive. But you know, just the level of assurance and confidence that we had when you came and helped us, I know so many other people have. And so we just really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the audience on the animal control budget? Okay, next up is the
Thank
fire
you.
department. Good night.
Night, thanks.
Welcome.
So the fire department is requesting $5,592,549 in payroll and $459,767 in expenses, with additional requests recommended by the town administrator of $70,030 in payroll and $23,026 in expenses, for a total FY '21 town administrator recommended budget of $6,145,372. And Chief Murphy and Deputy LaChance are here with us tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. Tonight, Deputy and I are going to split this presentation a little bit. First off, since we used a lot of this, our mission hasn't changed in a year or anything else. We're still doing the same things. We're still out there, you know, helping the public with fire-related EMS, medical-related issues, emergency management, or anything else. So we're going to take this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about some things that have changed and some things that we would like to kind of request going forward in the future, or anything else as we go through. So some updates, first of all, for last year. I think one of the biggest ones that probably made the most hit, especially at the employee party for the cookout this past summer, was, as you guys know, the Quint one was purchased. It went into service in August, and I'm happy to report that it's doing great. The guys are still doing a lot of training on it, which, to be honest with you, will probably continue forever, you know, because any of these trucks, they have to constantly be using them to maintain their proficiencies and all that stuff. So, you know, we got them to the point that they can use it, and now we want to make sure that they continue using it, and, you know, they're very happy with it, and it's done very well for us so far. The second thing for a new apparatus that we have taken possession of is last year, or for this year, for FY '20, we were approved to purchase a new ambulance. The ambulance is actually in. It's actually at the station currently. We're in the process of outfitting it with the various equipment and having the radios installed on it. And we also will need to do a little bit of driver training on it, because it's different and it's got some different computer systems than our current models that we have. So that's going on, that's happening now. We're hoping to have it in service probably within the next month, but that can change based on, you know, what we're doing. But so that's happened. Couple of other things, talking about some grants that were successful in getting last year through the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters grant. Deputy LaChance wrote a grant for $75,000 to purchase 7 thermal imager cameras which we had actually requested as a placeholder for capital this year, so they were happy to, when we went back to them and said, you can remove that, we were able to secure that through a grant. So we have been awarded the grant, and we're in the process now of actually ordering the equipment and all that stuff. They spent about 2 months trying different, brands from the different manufacturers that are out there. So that was the first thing. With grants, we were also successful in applying for and receiving another Assistance to Firefighters grant that was a regional grant that we combined with our SSRECC communities, so Cohasset, Norwell, Hull, and we also included Situate on this, and we applied for a pump training trailer type of thing, which is basically used to simulate the training that would be necessary if the fire engine was using multiple hose lines, and we can kind of throw some different, wrenches at the guys in a sense and simulate like, okay, you just had a water pressure loss and all this stuff, and it's actually a trailer that connects into the fire hydrant, or to the fire pump, so we don't actually have to pump water and all that. It goes through this trailer. But we received the grant for that for $189,000 from the federal government as well. We have not actually purchased that. We're still kind of deciding which one we're actually going to purchase, because there's a couple of different options that are out there. And that will include some training in addition to the equipment itself. Some other updates from last year is we had 2 retirements within our department. We had Lieutenant Mike Vento and Firefighter Timmy Kroll, both retired. Mike went back in July, and Timmy retired back in September. I think it was September, sometime at the end of September. Since then, we have been able to hire 4 new firefighters, because we still had some vacancies, 3 of which were sent and have graduated from the Mass Fire Academy, so they're up and working. Another 4th firefighter, we were very lucky. He came to us from another department, so he already had training and experience, and we were able to plug him into the mix right away. So we have 4 firefighters that are trained now and are working for us. We're also in the process right now that we have 5 others that are kind of in limbo waiting for academy start dates with the Mass Fire Academy. 2 are scheduled to start there in right around a month. They go at the beginning of February, and then we have a 3rd one that will be going at the beginning of March, and then we have 2 others that unfortunately aren't scheduled to go until the beginning of July, but we frequently get bump ups and get earlier start dates, so we're hoping to be able to get them in. So they're in the process right now. So you want to next slide? Okay. Deputy LaChances can talk a little bit about our call volume. As Michelle pointed out earlier, these were the slide numbers look like they have been updated. Your budget books would not have been based on when these were written. So.
Yep, so the call volume slide, that is updated. As you can see, over the 5 years, our total calls do go up each year. This year, we just went up over 4,600 calls for service. And that's 911 calls, fire alarms, EMS calls. Inspections will be later, so this is just calls for service. Our EMS calls are up. We did over 2,800 EMS calls. Transports were down about 40, 45, but that will fluctuate. We did just about 2,000 ambulance transports, which brought in about 1.2 to 1.3 million in revenue. Yep, the calls. This slide is a little off. The bar graph shown is not, we're talking about fire prevention. I will give you those numbers. This is showing our runs to Linden Ponds. A large older population. They do keep us busy. Our calls have increased up there. You can see our mutual aid. We give quite a bit of mutual aid. You'll notice we received less, meaning we're handling more of our own calls. But on average, like last year, we received about 80 mutual aid calls. That just means all our apparatus are tied up on other emergencies. We might have to call in somebody, to help us out. The fire prevention you don't have up there. In 2019, Lieutenant Napoli, our fire prevention officer, was a very busy man. A lot of construction in town, a lot of big projects. The numbers I have for him, up until November 1st, he had gone out over 900 times, issued permits, occupancy inspections, Avalon, the shipyard, Beale Street, a lot of projects going on. And if more projects come in, he's gonna be as busy, if not busier. The 26F inspections, those are home resale inspections. Those are required by law that we go out, do an inspection, smoke detectors are in the correct places, the correct type, stuff like that. Our on-duty crews do those inspections to alleviate some of Lieutenant DiNapoli's workload. In 2019, we did 569 of those inspections. So basically, that's how many houses sold in Hingham last year. And that generated about 30,000 in revenue coming in for those inspections.
Some of the key initiatives that we would like to work on, and truthfully, number one, I think was still on there last year, which was to continue the vacancies. A year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, we had 9 of the vacancies. Like I just mentioned, we have 4 people that are already working with us. We have 3 others that, you know, or I'm sorry, the 5 others that are in process, but with the additional retirements, then, you know, it's like you gain a little bit and you lose a little bit, and it's a constant never-ending type of thing. I am happy to announce that we have people that are interested to come to work here. The problem that we run into is that the civil service requirements. Unless they're a paramedic or if they're a resident, and there's actually only 4 people that are residents that are currently on the list, and one of which I don't think is actually still a resident any longer, unfortunately, but he still shows up on the list. But there's only, you know, the other people, the way the civil service system works, we're restricted, and we can't really do anything, even though we have people. We had one individual that was doing his paramedic ride training with us, and he wanted to come work here. The guys want to have him to come work here, but until he gets his paramedic, we can't do anything about it. And once we hire him, then we still have to wait for the fire academy, you know, dates and all that stuff. So we'd love to be able to get ahead and say, while you're still in paramedic school, let's make you the job offer, let's start the process for the fire academy. But the civil service system kind of restricts us and doesn't necessarily allow us to do that. So we have interest, but we just gotta, you know, kind of work it through within time. One of the other requests that we are, for a new request, and it's on a later slide, but I just want to talk about it a little bit right now, is the increase of staffing levels. So even going back to when Chief Johnson was working here, one of his things that he was working towards was the difference between our minimum number of people assigned to the group and the maximum number of people assigned. Currently, we have 2 people extra that, or not extra, but 2 people that are the, you know, can cover vacations and sick time, injuries, whatever the case. So our minimum staffing is 11, our maximum is 13. Chief Johnson was advocating and working towards making it 11 to 14, because what the effect is that will affect our overtime. And a reduction in, you know, so in other words, if I have 2 people that are out on from the 11 to 13, then we don't have to hire. If we have 3 people out, you know, 2 people on vacation, 1 person out sick, 1 person out injured, whatever the case, then we have to hire someone back at an overtime rate. So we're paying time and a half for that person versus paying someone else single time for it. So as you guys are probably well aware, our overtime, you know, budgeted versus our overtime actual for the last couple of years has been more than double. Last year, we actually spent over $1 million in overtime, yet we were actually only budgeted for about $490,000. So one of the things that, even going back to Chief Olson, the fire chief, not this Chief Olson, he had been asking to kind of continue to increase that, and that's why we're making the request this year for 1 additional person that would allow one of our operational groups to have 14 people assigned, the others would be at 13. That's something that, I won't lie to you, we're going to continue, you know, advocating that, because I think that's the answer to our overtime problems, is to, you know, increase that that staffing ratio so that we have more flexibility and can have people, because contractually we can have a minimum of 2 people, sometimes 3 people out on vacation and all that type of thing. So we're kind of working towards that.
So the CERT team, another initiative we've been working on for several years. It stands for the Citizens Emergency Response Team. It's made up of residents of the town that volunteer their time. Right now we have about 20 members on the team. And they help supplement us for large-scale events. You'll see the road race, they work the first aid station, they work the watering stations, the fireworks, Christmas in the Square. Great group of people, they help us out a lot. Those are some of the big events they do, but something they're getting really involved with lately is regional sheltering. So Hingham's part of a regional shelter group, mostly like the South Shore community towns. There's a regional shelter in Weymouth, there's an alternate in Situate and in Hanover. And our team has actually worked in those shelters during emergencies. Up to 72 hours, power failures, storms like that. In 2 weeks from now, they're working a large-scale exercise. So we're trying to support them. Every year, we're writing grants. We're able to buy equipment and fund the CERT team through that. So we're going to continue on working with them. CPR is another thing we've been working on with the town. We've been getting very busy teaching CPR. We've been teaching it at Town Hall, DPW, the library. We've actually had sent more of our firefighter paramedics to become instructors. So we teamed up with the rec department last year, and they do a great job. They're able to advertise on their website. So we've been doing a lot more with community CPR, just getting out and doing some public education.
Which, on the budget itself, if you notice, one of the things that we did do is we actually separated out $10,000 from our overtime that was specific for the CPR and other community efforts. And we're not actually asking for any additional money. We've been covering this out of our overtime. We just want to kind of put that in a separate account so that we can track it differently and kind of go along with that. So with our budget, I think the most obvious thing is if you look at our numbers between this year and last year, it's fairly flat. That's because we're based on FY20 rates for this year in our contract. The fire contract is up at the end of June, so they will hopefully be starting to bargain soon, and we can have some updated numbers, but unfortunately we're using old numbers, so there's no contractual raises built into this. There are a few new initiatives, or not new initiatives, a few other changes within it, specifically in some of our vehicle accounts, just because of the fact that, our maintenance on these vehicles is getting more expensive, just because parts and everything else. Same thing with our R&M for our buildings, the work that needs to be done. Beyond that, not a lot of other significant changes within our budget requests. With the one exception, we did also consolidate a number of line items into one larger group, and that was specific because we had a lot of office supplies, some of which were $250, $150 here, there, whatever. And we said this is kind of crazy to have 8 different, budget groups for that. So we didn't ask for any addition, with one exception. That was our copier bill for our annual service on it went up. And beyond that, we just compiled everything into one thing and said, let's make it easier, So, okay, where are we? New requests. So the $74,000 for the additional firefighter paramedic, I already covered that. One of the things that I also kind of want to take the time now to discuss a little bit, and we've mentioned this with Tom and Michelle and also through our advisory subgroup, is that even though we're continuing to advocate to increase our maximum staffing, we recognize the fact that changes within the fire department take time for things like this. So, as I mentioned, the restrictions on hiring the people and getting them into the fire academy are one issue, but it's also something that there's a lot of other things within our agency that take time to do. And one of our things that we just want to take the opportunity now to talk about is that right now the town is built and is sufficiently staffed with 3 fire stations. If there is any new development in new areas of town, then especially significantly South Hingham, then we don't necessarily know that the 3-station model is still going to work for us. And it's going to take a few years to be able to really recoup and, be able to react to that. So in other words, if we said, yes, we need to expand our services, it's not something that we're going to be able to do at the drop of a hat. So one of the things that we're looking at is that increase in the, the request to go from 11 up to, or I'm sorry, from 13 on the maximum to 14. That is kind of almost working in that same direction, because ultimately we see the fact that if we do end up having a significant development, then that's probably going to require us to have a fourth station, which is going to cause an increase in probably an additional 12 firefighters, additional vehicles, and all that stuff. So it's something that, we just need time to be able to do that. So we just wanted to kind of take the time now to mention it a little bit.
So there was an additional request for $14,000 for promotional exam expenses. We started this a year or two ago. We're going with assessment centers. So in the past, it was when a firefighter wanted to become a lieutenant, he or she would take a written exam. Lieutenant to captain, the same thing. It's a civil service exam. They would get scored whatever they got. And we would hire based on that score. So we think a better way of doing it, a lot of fire departments and police departments are doing it, is an assessment center. It's basically an 8-hour day. You hire an outside agency, a company to come in with professionals in the fire service and do an evaluation of the candidates. There's scenarios, there's human resource problems, they gotta write essays. It's an 8-hour day, and then they will rank those candidates based on their performance. We've done this twice with really, really good success. Each time we run it cost about $7,000. The 2 times we did it, we were able to kind of eat that expense out of our current budget because they were in 2 different budget years. Next year, we're gonna have to have an exam, 2 exams, a lieutenant and a captain at the same time. So that's why we're requesting that additional $14,000.
Our final request is for $5,000 for emergency management expenses. The emergency management is something that, it's kind of an additional role that the fire department does. And to be honest with you, recently it's really taken up a lot of our time, in a good way, but, it's definitely taken our time. And we don't currently have any budget for it. So we're requesting this. I actually did a survey with other Plymouth County fire chiefs, and I think we're actually the only town in Plymouth County that didn't actually have a budget. And the average cost on the budgets is $6,000 to $7,000 if you take out the Plymouths and stuff and they get money from the nuclear power plant. But the expenses for this would cover training. So for example, we just brought in some instructors to do training on operating and managing the Emergency Operations Center. We hosted that for a lot of the key people that would be involved in that back in November. We could bring in additional instructors if we had a training line item. It would also be to support the Operations Center itself. So if we had a long-term event and we decided that we wanted to open the EOC and staff it, then we would have to get food for the people, and we would have to have other supplies to do that. And without any budget, we've kind of been able to do that through the fire department, but as we're trying to ramp this up, we're trying to, realize that maybe we need to have a separate line item budget for that. We have been fortunate that we've also been able to historically secure numerous grants through the emergency management. This last fiscal year, we were actually able to get $5,100 through one grant that allowed us to buy what was that for? To buy supplies for the EOC and some other equipment for it. And we were also able to get a competitive grant from, same thing through MEMA, that was for $10,000 that the DPW is going to use to purchase one of the variable message boards that the town will owe. They're expensive. They're actually about $15,000, and the grant only allowed a cap of $10,000. So Randy is going to be able to, fund the additional $5,000 out of his expenses to purchase this, and he was very excited because I guess he's, wanted one for a while. But all total, as I said, the emergency management thing has really, besides doing some of the training, we've had a lot of involvement in the past declarations. Specifically, we actually just collected $56,000 from Hurricane Hurricane Sandy that was a federal reimbursement that dates back to 2012. Last year, we've also gotten some other money from 2013. Luckily, we've done some better on some of the more recent ones, and we're pleased to announce that from the the declaration for March 2nd and 3rd of 2018, when we had all of the back-to-back storms there, the town collectively collected $437,349 in reimbursements that were all federal reimbursements. And that took a lot of time to process the paperwork and, numerous meetings. I think they allow us to actually account for the amount of time that we did and the other departments, specifically Hingham Light was a big factor in DPW, and that was over $19,000 worth of work hours just doing the applications for all of this reimbursement. So it's a significant thing. The final thing, it's not an additional request, but, again, we like to take these opportunities whenever we get before you to talk about some things that are important to our department, and we always like to kind of mention the stations, and we know the town was working towards replacing the stations and, kind of hit some road bumps, if you want to call it that, and we, like to just kind of mention that we still desperately need those. That's why we're increasing our building maintenance expenses, because both of the outside stations are continuing to, get older, and they really, they've served the town very well, but, we definitely need to look towards another option.
So the SRECC,
You guys want to stop there for a moment?
Why don't we just,
Sure. Yep.
comments?
Yes, I was waiting for you to mention the stations. I got the tour.
Yep.
And I saw firsthand that we need to address the quality of the station houses. Looking at the budget, the one item that jumped out at me, at least in the salary area, was education,
Yes.
which nearly doubled.
Yes.
And could you
So
talk about that?
that's contractual with our college incentive program. And if you actually look, the next line item on it is longevity. And as we've had some of these retirements over the last couple of years, the people with the longevity is decreasing.
yep.
But the newer people, like the police department, I'm sure, that we're hiring already have college degrees or are closer to getting the college degree, so they're going back for it. So that's what that is that we're just finding more and more people, which we're very happy with, that are meeting the education incentive requirements that are in the contract. So.
Clearly the fire department is providing an incredible range of services. It's obviously not just fire, but, emergencies, dealing with ambulances, dealing with the aging population in the town. So you really are covering it all. I think the budget that you've presented is quite complete. I really don't have many questions on that.
Thank you. This was very, very helpful. One thing I would just note, and I read it in the budget materials, is that, bringing in an additional firefighter, as you talked, could have an impact on the overtime because of the dynamics of your budget. But I think we need to, and I think you called it out in your budget, be mindful that, from the time that the position is authorized, it's probably about 2 years, before you find somebody, you go through civil service, you get a spot in the academy, and that those time frames don't always line up neatly. So I think we also need to understand that as we're looking at that, the sweet spot of staffing and overtime, that there's about a 2-year lag time. And let's also not kid ourselves. We're paying for that position right now. It's just a matter of whether it's on the salary line or the overtime line and how many hours we're getting out of it.
Yes.
So I just kind of look at that and say that's a little bit of a reality. We appreciate your patience with the stations, and as we've been looking at different options, it's a little trickier than we thought. But we also, we want to, I I say this not to be, not to be trite, but I think sometimes in Hingham, when we're doing projects like this, they take longer than maybe we would all like. And I would like to think that as a result of that time, we end up with a better solution, and that's also my hope. I would also just echo something with respect to, Steve, you talked about staffing down the road. I think it has always been the town's hope that we could do a 3 fire station model that could allow for coverage around town. But even as we talked about that, we said, if there were 3 stations, there would be a 4th crew. That the idea that we would need those 11 or 12 additional firefighters is a given. It's just a matter of whether they're in a dedicated, in a structure or not. But as we look at what's happening in the town, the manpower requirements are out there. And so I don't want anybody to kind of think that the manpower is sort of a new thing. It's always been there, and I want to remind us of that. And then lastly, I just want to thank you and thank Deputy Powers in particular. Over the summer, I got an afternoon lesson in fire hydrants relative to the purchase of the water company. And it was extraordinarily informative. It's a complicated subject, believe it or not. And I also was able to see firsthand some of the challenges that you face in the geography of Hingham and making sure that homes are covered, because you have to do kind of the relaying that goes on. And as we've been, working towards integrating the water system, there are lots of different pieces, but an important part of our rules and regulations are kind of what happens with fire hydrants. So that was really informative, and it helped us to, I think, make some good decisions on there. So appreciate it.
I would just add, you mentioned potential expansions in South Hingham. I know that the folks that are looking at that from the town's perspective are looking very closely at siting firehouses and making sure that whatever is developed will be appropriately served by your department.
Yep.
Yeah. Questions from the audience?
I actually have a question. I missed the competition of not having a brother on. No, I actually just wanted to say that last year in our budget, we had the assessment money added into our expense money so that we could provide the test as well. And I think it's the assessment process is definitely worth the money, and it guarantees that I know that we always have an available list available.
I
would definitely just, order it and say it's something you should really consider.
In this very people-oriented business that we're all in, hiring the right people, particularly in leadership roles, is crucially important. And the consequences of a wrong decision can be really difficult in lots of ways.
Yeah.
The assessment center it's a more comprehensive way to evaluate candidates, and that's a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, it's something that up until the last few years, civil service didn't really offer it as an option, and now that they are, more and more communities are taking advantage of it. And as Deputy LaChance said, we've gone through it twice, and all of the candidates said they probably spent as much time studying for the assessments portion as they spend studying for, months worth of the physical exam itself that they have to take. And, I don't know, to be honest with you, what the lieutenants are now. Years ago, it was 10 or 11 books that you'd have to study, and you typically, to do well on it, would have to spend 4 or 5 months. Well, these guys are spending just as much effort into preparing for the assessment center, so I definitely think it's a great thing.
Yeah, and I think as you and the police chief have identified, your jobs are more complex, and you're dealing with a lot of different things, and in some ways, the approach with the assessment center really kind of gives you the ability to evaluate somebody's ability to do all the different facets of the job, which have changed over time. Okay, so do we go to SRECC now?
Let's jump, yeah.
Okay. Let's go to public safety utilities.
Okay, yep, it doesn't,
Okay.
we kind of have both of them, so,
Hydrants,
Yep.
there we go.
So, public safety utilities is on page 182.
Yep.
Where is mine? The department request is $407,750 for emergency water, $105,000 for street lighting, for a total recommended budget of $512,750.
So just, Michelle and Tom asked if we could just speak a little bit about it. So the first thing, as you know, the emergency water, that's the fee that, has historically been charged by Aquarian for any hydrant usage, whether it includes training, or for any actual fires that we have or anything like that. Every year, and we actually just got the request from them a few weeks ago, we supply Aquarian with estimates of what we use. Truthfully, we don't put meters on, a fire hydrant when we use it or anything else, but we can tell based on how long we were there and what type of hose lines we're using and all that stuff. We can kind of ballpark it. So that's nothing new. We've been doing that for a while. That account does also include $10,000 for the emergency repair of the fire hydrants, which, many years ago that may have seemed like a decent amount,
Yeah.
but that's less than 2 hydrants,
Right.
at the cost that it actually costs us to replace them. Through capital, there is also an additional line item that I think is $36,000 for hydrant replacement, but again, that doesn't really get us very far sometimes, especially since, some of the hydrants need to be replaced because they're broken, not necessarily because we say, hey, these are too old and we want to replace them. And I think you said you were going to talk about the lighting.
Well, Chief, just in terms of the $397,750 for emergency, when is that paid? Is it paid
That would be a
ratably
Sue
monthly?
question, because it doesn't actually come out of our budget at all.
is-
I think it's quarterly, I
It's
believe.
quarterly, yes. So the publicly owned fire hydrants are actually billed quarterly, and the private ones are billed monthly.
Timing is
Kinda-
important this time, so I just wanted to.
Yep. And,
Understand
I would just mention that as the town's always talked, that in the first year of town ownership of the water company, the existing rate structure will stay in place until, we have a little bit of experience and then do a cost of service study. So, some people have said, well, why would you have this water charge under town ownership? The rate structure may look very different a year from now, but for right
Right.
now, it's gonna stay in place.
Okay.
And the street lighting expense of $105,000 is for the 2,300 plus streetlights that are in town, that HMLP runs for us. There is some talk that number may go up in FY '22 because we've added a few streetlights, but for now, we're keeping it even for FY '21.
One thing that we should probably make sure of, Michelle, is that we let the chief and deputy chief know of the fire hydrant responsibilities that were defined in the request for proposal for the water system operator. Because one of the things we did is we looked at, what was expected of the typical operator, and then we looked and said, well, what do other communities do? And so off the top of my head, I believe that there's inspection, there's painting. In general, I would say the operator responsibility for care and maintenance of fire hydrants is greater. Also, the operator is, according to the RFP, asked to replace 10 hydrants a year in the entire water system. So we would assume that Hingham, that would be allocated. So we should just kind of make you aware of that. So,
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I can share that.
Any
Okay.
other questions?
And do we have one other?
SHRECC. So for those that don't know, SHRECC is our dispatch center. It stands for the South Shore Regional Emergency Communication Center. It's actually located here at Hingham Town Hall, and they provide the dispatch services for police and fire for Hingham, Hull, Norwell, and Cohasset. And they do have the availability to take in 1 to 2 more towns on top of that if the need arose. They've been in place now for probably 8 or so years. We've got a lot of benefits of having them. They've been able to get a lot of grant funding for us with equipment, technology. just 2 to 3 years ago, the Hingham Fire Department received about $400,000 worth of radios from a grant that the SSRECC was able to secure. I believe the police department recently. Yeah. MDTs, which are the computers that are in all the police cars, all the fire trucks, that give us instant access to information. Actually can give us a jump on any emergency. So a lot of benefits. They've gotten money into the technology that's helped out all the departments. They're continuing to write these grants, development grants. As the SSRECC ages, they gotta replace infrastructure and technology. Last year, they did over 75,000 calls for service. And typically that is calls for service, so we're trying to bounce the routine business calls. They're not answering those anymore. Like years past, the police department or the dispatch center downstairs would get everything. So the SSRECC is typically answering calls for service, whether it's police or fire. Just last week, I was meeting with the director, and she had told me from 2018 to 2019, their 911 calls went up 62%. They're now answering cell calls, cell 911 calls, text to 911. So Hingham's assessment is on there for the 946 for our share of.
Part of the increase for this was because before they took on the cell calls, they were only taking on 911 land calls. And the cell calls were going to state police, I believe in Middleborough, I think, or Framingham, one of the two. And the SSRECC took over the cell towers in this area for these calls. And it's really, really cranked up their call volume substantially, so. But.
And it's really helped on some standardization type of things and interoperability. We have monthly meetings where the police and the fire are in one room. Doesn't happen often, but it's, we're able to work things out. On top of that, we meet with all the local fire chiefs, deputy chiefs from those towns. So it's been really beneficial. It's been a good thing. It's evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. What is the total SSRECC budget that we're some percentage, so I'm trying to figure out what that is.
So yes, it's based on percentage. Hingham has always been the busiest, user of the SSRECC, so we do pay the most.
I think we're at 55% of their overall budget.
Yeah.
So
And the other
about
three towns.
1.7.
It's close. It's right around there. I think it's under 2 million, but it's around that amount. So.
And part of the SSRECC budget ends up coming back to the town in the form of rent for their center
Right.
Right.
in town hall, and some
And-
payback for utilities used here.
Is there also an offset for some financial services?
I believe so, yes. Yes.
Yeah, because their
Does-
payroll goes through the town and
Yeah.
some other things like that. But, as the deputy mentioned, some of just the equipment alone. So all of our frontline fire apparatus, not the reserve trucks, we don't have them in those. And, a number of the police cars, I'm sure all of the, active patrol cars that are out there have the MDTs, the mobile data computer terminals. Well, the SSRECC is responsible for everything in those. They're responsible for the, program that we use for it. They're responsible for the air cards for each one, which is about $50 per MDT. They're responsible for the computer itself and all that stuff. So all of these things were, purchased through various grants over the last, 9-10 years as they've been, up and running, and that would be, our budget for infrastructure and everything else would be significant if we didn't, have them. So there's definitely a lot of advantages to it.
Does this budget request reflect the contract that was recently settled? Do we know?
I would have to check with Tom on that.
Okay.
I know this reflects a 5% increase over last year's amount, but I can double check with him.
I believe that there was a new
I believe so too.
contract executed within the last month or two.
I'll check on that.
Okay.
Is the Hingham percentage based on usage or population or something else?
Both, actually. So when it originally was, when the SSRECC was originally created, the percentage was based on 911 calls to that community. But they knew at the time that wasn't necessarily going to be accurate. Because, for example, if, Hingham, more Hingham residents were calling the 1212 number than the 911 number, then it wasn't going to reflect in that. But they knew that that was the only way that they could get data to look at to start. So the plan was that once they actually were up and running, then they could say, okay, a call for service is this, and we're going to see what the call for service is in Hingham versus Hull versus whatever. So the formula does take into account both the population and the call for service from each community. So.
Are you satisfied that Hingham is treated fairly with that formula?
Yeah, they just re-looked at it.
It's been being looked at and redefined,
Yeah. But it's been a work in progress. It was originally created that they were gonna re-examine it in 5 years. That was a few years ago. And I think I know Tom has been involved in it, and I know that they've looked at the numbers and all that stuff. The SRECC is also, not just the SRECC, but the personnel involved in it, specifically myself and Chief Olson, just had a meeting. They have been actively trying to pursue other business to come into it. Because one of the things when they built this is that it was built to expand, but it not necessarily wouldn't need to increase the costs. So if more customers came in, then the assessments would potentially go down for each of the communities. Or they're actually, I think right now, they're talking about potentially keeping the assessments the same, but to build in some capital because of that extra, revenue or anything to, plan to replace some of the aging equipment and all that. But they're actively, pursuing different, other communities. And we just had a meeting about 2 weeks ago with one community, but we haven't heard anything. And State 911 knows that they're still trying to encourage communities to go towards regional centers. So they're actually potentially going to create new incentives. Specifically, they're talking about, and this hasn't been voted on, I think they said they're going to vote on this in 2 weeks, I think. They're talking about incentivizing a community by the State 911 would pay for 3 years of that community's assessment and the cost that it would take it for them to join. Because obviously if another community decided to join the SRECC, then there's going to be some, radio linkage and some, infrastructure changes and programming changes for that community. So State 911 is trying to incentivize this.
Okay, thanks.
I'd also point out, I was on the advisory committee when SRECC was established, and what I remember is that we received grants from the state for a lot of the equipment that SRECC started up, and that was a big capital avoidance cost to the town because our dispatch technology was outdated. I think we all kind of knew that given what happens with technology as we approach that 10-year mark, that's a time when there could be some major capital investments required to stay current with technology.
And State 911 knows that too. It's just they've been apparently focusing on expanding the new services, and now they're saying, okay, now we got to look at how to support the other services. So hopefully the, last 2 years they haven't had as much success in the grants as they had some of the previous years, but, they've made that very well known, and as have other agencies and stuff to State 911. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of a change with that as well. So.
Thank you. Anything else on SRECC?
I just wanted to add one fact to this, and I know this comes up quite a bit, but that is a cost for the overall total operation. There's no unfunded liabilities that go along with that, because that cost includes the health insurance benefits and everything else that are being paid. And I know when this was first thing, that people forgot to add that in there, so they saw the jump in the price, but really we've been paying it all along, so there's no more cost to the town than what's up there.
Thank you for,
I think that's a
yeah,
significant amount of money there.
absolutely, absolutely.
Which, compared to some of the other regional centers, they can't all say that.
Yeah.
Some of them actually are town employees, and, that we actually were using that as a selling point to the SRECC, to some of these other communities, is, hey, there's extra things on here, and who knows where that's gonna come, whereas the SRECC model is different, and it was built to encompass and include everything, so.
Thank you so much.
Can I just add one thing,
Please.
not on the SRECC, but on something different? Tom actually asked us from one of his positions that he's requesting is the GIS position. GIS is actually very useful in emergency management and fire departments. We routinely will ask Lonnie to assist us with, different maps or anything else. But even more importantly, when we're trying to look at our call volume and where we potentially may need to locate a station, or even if an emergency happened, specifically, I'm thinking of a few years ago where we had a microburst type of weather event that came through specifically up in the Crow Point area. And, we actually were able to kind of chart everything on a map and show exactly where, the thing would. So if a large enough emergency happened, then GIS in real time can actually work for public safety and for public works to kind of identify the areas that we need to go out and focus on as, first aid or anything. And I know the training we were at in the Emergency Operations Center, one of the instructors was the MEMA Region 2 director. And I kind of introduced him to Tom, and Tom was talking to him a little bit about it, and he was very knowledgeable on GIS and said MEMA actually has a few full-time GIS people that work for them just for that. So I know when Tom mentioned it, he said, would there be any use for it for you guys? And yes, both fire department and emergency management, it would be very useful. So.
Thank you so much. Excellent.
Yes. Nope.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we have one vote.
Yes.
This is 3 one-day wine and malt beverages licenses for the Hingham Community Center because hip hip hooray, Cabaret is back. I actually, over the weekend, had sent an email to Chief Olson and Lieutenant DiNapoli just to confirm that they were in the loop on using the armory and that preparation steps were being taken and that necessary personnel would be on site, because we've sometimes gotten surprised in the past with using the armory, and both responded very quickly to say that there have been a series of meetings. Lieutenant DiNapoli had just been at the armory, I think, Friday, to go through. So, Chief, I think you're satisfied with the plan, as is Lieutenant DiNapoli?
Yes, we actually met with Virginia Walsh, who's working with the guys, the Cabaret representative. We actually started this 2 years ago. We wanted to do it last year. So, because it's been going on for so long, the plans are already in place. We know the operation, we know how it works, so it's really been an easy thing to go through, and it's basically the same plans that we had for the previous years, just in place again.
Are you performing?
I am staying away from that.
Okay.
Yeah. No
So,
cooking on my time.
is there heat in that building?
What's that?
Is there heat in that building?
Yeah, that was the reason it was closed down.
Right,
because
I
they
was there at a
kept
few
reducing
events
the
with
work
no
on the
heat.
asbestos removal, so
Yeah,
it's-
yeah,
Everything's good now.
great.
And I know that, what will happen is Lieutenant, before everything starts, Lieutenant DiNapoli will go on the fire inspection, and the state, building inspector will come down, and they'll work together to make sure everything's set up properly.
And then I think there's gonna be public safety presence at the event, so.
There'll be a fire, watch there, as well as a police officer assigned just to the inside of the building, and then there'll be police officers outside for traffic as
Great.
well.
Well, thank you for working with the community center and the Cabaret team to
Be
make
nice to
this.
have it back.
Yeah. Do you have any questions, Joe?
I don't.
Okay, do you want to make a motion?
I move to approve the issuance of 3 special one-day wine and malt beverage licenses to Virginia Walsh on behalf of Hingham Community Center for Cabaret 2020, to be held at the Hingham Armory on January 30th, 31st, and February 1st, 2020, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. This approval is contingent on the inspection and approval of the state building inspector prior to the event.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Michelle, Town Administrator report?
I actually have a report on behalf of Karen, if you'd like me to. So, on behalf of Karen Johnson, I am sorry I could not be with you this evening, but I wanted to take a moment to recognize the passing of a very fine citizen, John McHugh. An absolutely delightful soul, John spent his retirement caring for others. A Navy veteran, he was an active member of the Veterans Council and a volunteer in the Veterans Services Office. He served as a member of the Foth Committee, helping to honor the memory and legacy of Hingham's Medal of Honor recipient. He was a resident of the Lincoln School Apartments and a leader in that community. John was an ordained deacon affiliated with St. Paul Parish, and in that role lent counsel and comfort to the sick, the imprisoned, and just those in need of a friend at places like the Pat Roach Hospice House, the Commander Anderson House, and the Old Colony Correctional Center. For me, John was always the bright light in the room. I will miss his warm smile and his enthusiasm for life, and I will make every effort to exemplify his commitment to and passion for those in need. Godspeed, John. From Karen Johnson.
Thank you, and thank you to Karen. That was lovely. Joe? Just two things. Joe read the dates for Cabaret, and tickets are on sale for Cabaret.
I've already
So-
been solicited, so.
So I think those will go fast. I just, Michelle, one other thing, and I know this is a time of year when things are so busy, but I'm wondering if it's as easy as just sending a note out tomorrow. But, you know, tonight, we heard Harbormaster Corson talking about a $2 million grant. I was trying to add up the numbers of the grants that Chief Olson and Chief Murphy talked about, and I think there was another $1 million of grants and reimbursements that were talked about. And I'm just wondering if we could maybe send a note to, you know, all the department heads tomorrow, just what were any sort of grants that they received in 2018? I think it's important that we acknowledge our department heads are so good at helping bring federal and state dollars into work in our community. And I have a feeling that when we aggregate those numbers, it's really going to be significant. And so if we could do that, it would,
Sure.
I think it would be great to report out at a future meeting when you have it.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else?
I would move to adjourn.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.